Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we are going to look at question 5 of the Math 206.5 Final Exam Review. We are asked to sketch a graph of f of x where f of x is given by 4 times cosine of 3x minus pi over 2 minus 1. And this can be really intimidating, so let's take it step by step. First, let's identify all of the relevant pieces that were given in this function. So we have a, which is the coefficient of the function, would be 4, and b is the coefficient of x, which is 3. C is that thing being added or subtracted to x, which in this case would be, if it's going to be positive pi over 2 because it's being subtracted. The thing being subtracted is what we're looking for, so if it was a plus sign, then c would be negative. And then d, our vertical shift, will be -1. Okay, so now that we have those labeled, just taken from the function that we were given, let's figure out what is the period for f of x. So to determine the period of a sine or cosine function, we're going to take 2 pi and divide it by b. In this case, b is equal to 3, so our period will be 2 pi over 3. Okay, so we've answered part A. How about part B? What is the amplitude of f of x? The amplitude is uppercase A, and it is the absolute value of lowercase a, so it's going to be the absolute value of 4, which is 4. What is the phase shift? So that's like the horizontal movement of the graph. And to calculate the phase shift, so I'm just going to call it PS, that would be C over B. So C is pi over 2. In this case, we're going to have pi over 2 divided by 3. Using a little bit of trickery, I can come up here, I think. We're going to rewrite this pi over 2 divided by 3. I'm going to put 3 over 1 to turn it into a fraction. Then we can rewrite as multiplication, pi over 2 times, take the reciprocal. Okay, so the phase shift is pi over 6. So normally a sine graph will start at 0. Cosine graph starts at 0. This particular cosine graph will now start at pi over 6. Okay, so the phase shift is pi over 6. What is the equation of the midline? So all cosine and sine graphs have a midline. That's where, when we look at the key points, every other key point hits the midline. So that y value or f of x value will be the same at every other key point. And we calculate the midline because it's y equals d. So in this case, our midline equation will be y equals -1. It is an equation, so we want to make sure that there is an equal sign, because that's kind of a key element of an equation, is to have an equal sign, and it's y equals whatever d is. What are 5 key points for one period of f of x? Okay, when I do my key points, I like to do the x's all together and then the y's all together, because of course they're super related, but I like just kind of building the x's up and then figuring out the y's as needed based on each other as well. So to start with the x values, normally we would start x at 0, but remember there's a phase shift, so we're going to start at pi over 6. So our very first x coordinate will be pi over 6. How do we calculate the next one? Well, I like to determine the increments, and to determine the increments, and these are the increments for the key points, the x values specifically, we're going to take the period, whatever we got for the period, and we're going to divide it by 4. Every period in our graph, in our cosine graph or sine graph, will have 5 key points. So to figure out the increments we want to use, we're going to divide by 4. And the period was 2 pi over 3 divided by 4. So I'm going to just rewrite this. I'm going to skip the step where I do division and go straight to multiplication just for time's sake. Whoops. And I said that and then still didn't take the reciprocal of 4. Okay, so we're going to simplify. That's going to be 2. That's going to be 1. We're going to end up with pi over 6. How convenient. It's the same as our phase shift. What a coincidence. Okay, and it is a coincidence. Whoa, I kind of said that sarcastically. I shouldn't have said it sarcastically. No. That is a coincidence. It won't always match the phase shift. Okay, so to figure out the next x coordinate, I need to take the first one, the previous one, and add the increment to it. So what we're going to be looking at for this right here is pi over 6 plus pi over 6. And it's up to you talk to your instructor whether you need to simplify or not. I personally will simplify, but I generally encourage my students, like very rarely, this is the only time I really do it, where I say don't worry about simplifying because it's a lot, this is hard enough, why add an extra factor to it? But I will simplify. So 1 pi plus 1 pi will be 2 pi over 6, and that's equivalent to pi over 3. So my next x coordinate will be, that's gross pi over 3. To figure out the next one, I'm going to take my previous one, 2 pi over 6, and I'm going to add to it pi over 6. And you might be saying, wait a minute, you just simplified, so why aren't you using pi over 3? Great question. The reason I'm not is because the increments have a denominator of 6, and I would ultimately have to go back to 2 pi over 6. I would have to unsimplify my work. So that's why I just use the unsimplified value when I'm determining the next x coordinate. 2 pi plus 1 pi, that's 3 pi over 6. And 3 pi over 6 will simplify to pi over 2. Okay, now we're going to take pi over 2, but what am I really going to use? That's right, I'm going to use 3 pi over 6. 3 pi over 6, and sorry, that's really gross. I'm at the bottom of the screen and I'm trying not to hit the keyboard. 3 pi over 6 plus 1 pi over 6 will be 4 pi over 6. That's going to simplify to 2 pi over 3. And last but not least, we have 4 pi over 6, and I'm going to add to it one final pi over 6. Oh, I can't simplify. The first one, 5 pi over 6. Now, these numbers can look intimidating. So how do I know, how do I have some sense of confidence that these really are the correct x values? And one thing we can do to check is take the last x coordinate of the key points and subtract it by the first. So 5 pi over 6 minus pi over 6, and we get 4 pi over 6. But 4 pi over 6, do we remember what that simplifies to? That simplifies to 2 pi over 3. This should match the period. Whoop. And it does, so I feel very confident that I have the x values correct. Now, what about the y values? So what I do, because this is cosine starts at either a minimum or a maximum. Because a is positive, it's going to start at the top, and that means the second key point will touch the midline, right? Because every other point has to hit the midline. It's going to be this second point. So I know this is going to be -1. How do I determine this one? This one's going to be above -1. We're going to use the amplitude to help us determine where it should be. It's going to be 4 units above the midline based on the amplitude. 4 units above. So this is going to be 4 plus -1. This is going to be at 3. Okay, so we have the top, the middle. This one's going to be the bottom. So this is going to be the midline minus the amplitude. It's going to go down to -5. So the midline should be halfway between the highest point and the lowest point on the graph. So -1 should be exactly the same distance from 3 as it is from -5, which it is. It's a distance of 4. Okay, then we go back to that midline, and then we end our cosine graph back at the top. So that's setting up 5 key points for 1 period, but we are asked to graph 2 full periods. So we'll set this up and we'll graph 2 full periods. Hopefully I can squeeze it in on this graph. Looking at my x coordinates, what would be the most appropriate unit for my x coordinates? It looks like pi over 6 is going to be a good choice. That worked out really well that the increments and the phase shift were the same. That was very lucky on our part. So I'm going to call this one 1 pi over 6. This will be 2 pi over 6, but this is going to get squished real fast, so I'm not going to write 2 pi over 6. This is 3 pi over 6, which I'm going to write as pi over 2. Ooh, it zoomed in on me. Okay. Then we have 4 pi over 6. Here we have 5 pi over 5 pi over 6. 6 pi over 6. This will be 7 pi over 6. 8 pi over 6. This will be 9 pi over 6, which will be 3 pi over 2. 10 pi over 6, and then lastly we'll have 11 pi over 6. Okay, and what increments do we want to use for the y coordinates or the f of x coordinates? I would use 1s, right? That looks like a good choice. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Now we're going to start at, so our ordered pairs, we have pi over 6 comma 3, pi over 6 comma 3. Then we have pi over 3, -1 right here. So if sometimes we might want to just put this dashed line in just to represent the midline, and again, every other point should hit that midline. Then we have pi over 2, -5 down here. 2 pi over 3, -1 back at the midline. Now we're going to go back to the top. This is 1 complete period of our cosine function. It does say 2 complete periods. Now the 5 pi over 6 comma 3, it starts 1 period, it also ends another period. So it's the last point of the first period. Now the second period is going to start there. So we start at the top, we're going to go down to the midline, down to the minimum, back to the midline, and back to the maximum. and we're going to do a nice curve, right? We don't use it's not a sharp point. It's not chevron. Make it a nice smooth curve as best you can. I know this one's going to be really tall and skinny. Let's see how I do. Oh, that wasn't so bad. I did miss one of the points, but it was actually pretty good. This has been question 5 of the final review. Thank you for stopping by.